The sun hung over Los Angeles like a heavy, suffocating blanket in the summer of 1984. It was a year of profound contrasts, a time when the city was supposed to be celebrating its moment in the global spotlight. The Olympic Games had arrived, bringing with them a surge of patriotism and a deceptive sense of security. Underneath the neon lights and the cheering crowds, a record-breaking heat wave gripped the streets, making the air thick and restless. People kept their windows open, desperate for a breeze that never came, unknowingly inviting the darkness inside. While the world watched athletes compete for gold, a different kind of predator was beginning to roam the sprawling neighborhoods of Southern California. He didn't care about the festivities. He thrived in the sweltering silence of the night, waiting for the city to close its eyes. The first crack in the city's veneer of safety appeared with the discovery that horrified even the most seasoned investigators. In a modest apartment, 79-year-old Jennie Vincow was found brutally murdered. The scene was not just violent, it was ritualistic and profoundly cruel. Detective eyes, usually hardened by years of gang violence, widened at the level of overkill. There was no clear motive, no obvious theft that justified such savagery. It was the calling card of a monster who took pleasure in the act itself. This wasn't a standard homicide, it was a declaration of war against the innocent. The brutality signaled the arrival of a predator unlike any the police had ever encountered, a shadow that moved with a terrifying sense of purpose. As the weeks passed, a chilling realization began to settle over the detectives. Usually, serial killers followed a type, a preference for age, gender, or social standing. But this killer was different. He was an anomaly. He struck across all demographics with a terrifying randomness that defied logic. Men, women, children, the elderly, the wealthy in their hillside mansions, and the poor in their cramped bungalows. No one was safe. This lack of a pattern became the core conflict for the investigation. Without a predictable victim profile, the entire city was a target. The Night Stalker was a ghost who could appear anywhere at any time. The psychological impact on Los Angeles was immediate and transformative. The summer of fear had truly begun. The city of dreams became a city of nightmares. Residents who once enjoyed the cool evening air now lived in a state of hyper-vigilance. They began sleeping with every light in the house turned on, hoping the brightness would ward off the evil. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts and window bars within hours. Guard dogs were purchased in record numbers, and the sound of a rustling leaf or creaking floorboard was enough to send a family into a panic. The boogeyman was no longer a bedtime story to scare children. He was a living, breathing reality. Adding to the atmospheric dread was the discovery of a dark, supernatural element left behind at the crime scenes. Investigators found occult symbols, specifically pentagrams, drawn on the walls and even on the skin of the victims. This wasn't just a murderer, he was a self-proclaimed soldier of darkness. The satanic signature added a layer of metaphysical terror to the hunt. It painted the killer as something more than a man, a creature fueled by a dark ideology. Then came the harrowing accounts from those few who managed to survive a midnight intrusion. Their stories were consistent. They spoke of a man who emerged from the shadows, his eyes wide and vacant. Two details became recurring motifs in the manhunt: the overwhelming smell of physical decay, a smell of death, and the sight of his blackened, rotten teeth. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. He was a figure of pure filth, a phantom who left almost no evidence. There were no fingerprints. However, among the blood, they found one consistent clue: rare sneaker prints. The shadow did not stay confined to the hazy borders of Los Angeles. Just as the LAPD began to buckle under the psychological weight of the summer of fear, the monster expanded his hunting grounds, proving that no one in California was safe. In August 1985, the terror drifted north to San Francisco. The brutal assault on an elderly couple in their home shattered any hope that the killer was not a local anomaly. This geographic expansion reached the highest levels of government, thrusting the mayor and local police into a desperate frenzy. The pressure on law enforcement reached a searing boiling point. Investigators were no longer just looking for a killer, they were racing to prevent the total psychological collapse of two major American cities. Amidst the chaos, a forensic breakthrough provided a slender thread of hope. While the killer was meticulous in his brutality, he was careless about his feet. At several crime scenes, investigators had found the distinct tread of an Avia sneaker. This wasn't a common shoe, but a specific rare model that gave detectives a physical tether to the phantom. A massive effort began to track the sales of this footwear across the state. Detectives spent hundreds of hours in sporting goods stores, sifting through paper receipts and interviewing bewildered clerks. They were looking for a ghost who wore a size 11, but every lead brought them closer to understanding the physical reality of the man behind the pentagrams. The true emotional weight of the investigation was carried by the survivors. These were the men and women who had looked into the abyss and managed to claw their way back. They lived in a state of fractured peace, haunted by the memory of a silhouette standing over their beds. Their bravery in providing testimony was the backbone of the manhunt. Through their trembling accounts, a clearer picture emerged. They didn't just describe a tall, thin man. They described a presence that felt fundamentally wrong. They spoke of the smell of death that clung to him, a nauseating mix of body odor and physical decay. Most hauntingly, they described his smile, a jagged display of blackened, rotting teeth. These survivors had lost their peace, but their descriptions provided the map to unmask the monster. The turning point came when a witness spotted a suspicious orange Toyota idling near a targeted neighborhood. With incredible presence of mind, a partial license plate was recorded. When police finally discovered the vehicle abandoned in a dusty lot, they knew they were at the threshold of a revelation. Forensic teams descended upon the car, scouring every inch for a mistake. Inside, they found a single pristine fingerprint left on the rearview mirror. It was as if the killer had looked at himself one last time before stepping out into the night, leaving behind the one thing that would destroy him. The print was rushed to Sacramento, where the computerized fingerprint system began to churn through its archives. The match was definitive. The fingerprint belonged to a 25-year-old drifter from El Paso, Texas, Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez. In an instant, the Night Stalker was stripped of his supernatural aura. He was no longer a phantom of the heat wave. He was a man with a name, a history of thefts, and a documented face. Detectives stared at his mugshot, a man with hollow cheeks and eyes that burned with cold intensity. He was no longer a mystery. He was a target. Recognizing the danger, officials unleashed a total media blitz. Within hours, Richard Ramirez's mugshot was broadcast into every living room in California. His face was on every newspaper, and his name was repeated on every radio frequency. The authorities were turning the entire population into a collective net. Yet, in a twist of terrifying irony, Ramirez was the only one who didn't know. As the sun rose, he sat on a bus heading back into Los Angeles, unaware that the face in the window was now the most hunted image in the world. Ramirez stepped off the bus into the oppressive heat of East Los Angeles, his mind likely already drifting toward his next conquest in the city he had held hostage for so long. He walked with a predator's gait toward a small convenience store, seeking a drink to cut through the smog-thickened air. But as he crossed the threshold and the door's bell chimed, the world shifted beneath his feet. There, stacked in neat rows near the counter, were newspapers. Every single headline screamed the same name: Richard Ramirez. Above the bold, ink-smeared text was his own face. The mugshot, taken years prior, staring back at him with the same cold, vacant intensity he used to terrorize his victims. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The veil of anonymity that had been his greatest weapon was gone. He was no longer the invisible phantom of the night. He was the most hunted man in the world. Panicked and desperate, he fled the store, stepping back into a world that was suddenly closing in on him from every angle. He tried to blend into the Saturday morning crowd, but his tall, gaunt frame and wild, unkempt hair were impossible to miss in the bright California sun. In a frantic attempt to escape, he crossed the street and tried to carjack a woman, but the neighborhood of East Los Angeles was already on high alert. The summer of fear had hardened the hearts of the residents, and they were no longer willing to be prey. A group of men recognized the face from the news. One shouted his name, and the collective terror of the past year transformed instantly into a singular, righteous fury. Ramirez began to run, but he wasn't fleeing from sirens or flashing lights. He was being pursued by the very people he had sought to destroy. Ordinary citizens, grandmothers, mechanics, and young men dropped what they were doing and joined the chase. The predator had officially become the prey. The pursuit spanned several blocks, a desperate sprint through alleyways and over chain-link fences. The air was thick with the sound of shouting and the rhythmic pounding of boots on hot asphalt as the mob grew in size. Finally, his lungs burning and his legs failing him, Ramirez was cornered on Hubbard Street. He had nowhere left to turn. The community delivered its own form of justice before the authorities could even arrive on the scene. They descended upon him with fists and kicks fueled by months of sleepless nights and paralyzing dread. By the time the police cruisers finally screeched to a halt, the Night Stalker was a broken, bloodied heap on the pavement, his aura of supernatural power completely shattered. The officers had to fight through the angry crowd just to pull him to safety, not out of mercy, but to ensure he faced the formal, cold judgment of the law. As he was led away, his face bruised and his power stripped, the residents of East Los Angeles stood their ground, having finally exorcised the demon from their streets. The subsequent trial was a descent into the macabre, a media circus that transfixed the world. Far from being a humbled prisoner, Ramirez leaned into his persona as a soldier of darkness. He transformed the courtroom into a stage for his twisted ideologies, appearing with a pentagram drawn on his palm, which he held up to the cameras with a chilling grin. He would shout, "Hail Satan," during the proceedings, his behavior characterized by a sneering lack of remorse that horrified the public. Yet, in a disturbing display of human psychology, His dark charisma attracted a following of groupies, individuals who sent him letters and attended the trial in a bizarre show of support. This circus-like atmosphere only added to the emotional weight carried by the survivors and the families of the victims, who sat just feet away from the man who had shattered their lives. The final confrontation in the courtroom was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. One by one, the survivors stood up and faced the monster. They looked past the rotting teeth and the hollow eyes, reclaiming their voices in a room filled with the heavy silence of justice. When the judge finally handed down the sentence, 19 death warrants, Ramirez remained defiant, muttering about how death always comes with the territory. But the state of California had spoken. He was sent to San Quentin to await an execution that would never come by the hand of man. Richard Ramirez spent decades on death row, eventually dying from natural causes in 2013. He never showed an ounce of regret, but his legacy is not one of darkness. It is a story of a city that refused to stay broken, of survivors who found their strength, and of a community that finally stopped looking at the shadows and chose to step into the light.